Hello and a very warm welcome. I'm Jane Dutton. In half an hour's time, the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana will deliver his 2024 budget speech in Cape Town. I think it's fair to say it's possibly one of his most important, a bit like the President who delivered his SONA address there last month. Let's hope this is going to be a lot more exciting and more relevant to all of us. And, you know, I don't need to tell you how bad our finances are at the moment. Just the fact that we have a 60% unemployment for our youth says it all. And he doesn't have much to play with, knowing that the elections are just around the corner. We heard last night that they're going to be held on the 29th of May. And if you are one of those who hasn't registered, please go ahead and do so. So what we want to find out today is what it means for you and for me and for our pockets, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll tell it to you all live on EWN.
So Minister mina ngathanda address into yoba akanyuse imali or imakanye imali makayifake
very limited in many instances because these departments, they actually leave these huge amounts, this money idle in their bank accounts. And by not actually spending and returning this money back to the fiscus, they will claim that it's a saving. But in actual fact, if you do the math, it's not savings because, yes, they will gain some sort of interest on the balance.
Every year. Ne petrol sesisenyuka oke naye bayikhona icebo elenzekayo ba ihlale endaweni eyi-1 okanye yehle kunoba inyuke uyasikwenza njani.
We are faced with the challenges of the health, education, electricity, and I hope that our government is going to look and touch those issues and stop cutting the budget when it comes to those departments.
I'm homeless here, and I would like you to speak about the homeless people who stay outside. If you can maybe help them, give them some place to stay, maybe like a shelter, or give them tents to stay outside. See?
They have to look at the needs of the elderly, because it's the elderly who build the country. And now when is there pensioners? We as pensioners suffering. Gone living on a 2060 for a month because life is expensive.
Gosh, you can really feel their pain, can't you? And issues that affect so many people in South Africa. I wish I could say that it's going to be good news this afternoon. I suspect that it probably won't be. It's going to be a tough balancing act that he needs to honour. The centre of Cape Town has been abuzz with demonstrators today. A collection of organisations, the SACP, COSATU, TAC and the Back to Work campaign, they're protesting ahead of this budget. And they're demonstrating over issues including unemployment, budget cuts, healthcare and privatisation matters. I've got guests with me who are going to talk us through what we can expect today. Billy Jabber, tax expert at Deloitte, and George Tsesane, government and healthcare industry leader, also from Deloitte. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
What can he do today?
I don't envy him, right?
No.
I was reviewing the last budget speech a few days ago, and one of the words that came out, that he spoke about a lot was trade-offs, right? Understandable, given the balancing act he has to do, rising government spending and debt levels, but declining revenue. So, looking forward to see what trade-offs is going to be to be doing there. But importantly, there are some specific things, I guess, from my point of view that I'm looking forward to. Given the space that I'm playing, which is government and public services and healthcare. So, as it relates to state-owned entities, one of the things he spoke about in the last budget speech is around the public-private partnership, the framework, right? And the review of that framework to make sure that it's a lot more easier for private sector and public sector to collaborate and take the country forward. So looking for more detail on that. And then, you also spoke about the freight logistics roadmap, right? We know all the challenges around Transnet, and so looking forward to understanding more around that roadmap, what that looks like. And then given the rising debt and spending, he also mentioned something around National Treasury has identified savings, right? And in my view, there's something that we don't
Let me
speak
guess,
enough.
they're my personal savings.
I'm hoping not, right? So what I'm looking forward to is what savings they are able to make in government, right? And all sorts of things have been spoken about, whether it's the size of the cabinet, the public sector wage bill, and so on and so forth. So what tangible savings can we make in that space? And then, just generally, making sure that there's fiscal discipline. What does that look like? And some details around that.
Okay, and you, Billy?
So one of the factors contributing to the difficult financial position that you referred to is the fact that tax collections, we know, are behind budget.
Yep.
At the time of the medium-term budget policy statement, the prediction was about 56 billion. A year ago, going into the budget speech, we were in the fortunate position of being 93 billion ahead of budget. So it's obviously a big reversal. And the biggest contributor to that is the mining companies. And we know the massive challenges being faced by the mining companies due to commodity prices, and also the logistical issues that George has already touched on. So we've heard about massive retrenchments that are coming, and obviously that has a massive effect on the unemployment rate, on tax collections, from a social point of view. So these are all very urgent matters, and I think we will be watching anxiously to see where we've landed. Was that 56 billion estimate correct? He also mentioned that he'll be looking for 15 billion of extra taxes. That's actually quite a modest number in the overall scheme of things. Our total tax, gross tax collections are over 1.7 trillion. So it's less than 1%, but we'll be interested to see where that's coming from. He indicated that there's not going to be massive tax rate changes. We can't afford to do that. We can't push up the VAT rate. We can't push up individual tax rates. We can't push up the corporate tax rate because we're competing for investment. So really, and of course, squeezing the tax base harder is the low road. It's not the way to encourage growth. We have to grow the economy. There is no substitute for that. And I think, generally speaking, tax can enable that, but it happens elsewhere.
And it's not going to get you the votes, is it? Lindsay Dendlinger went out on the streets and she paints a picture for us about what to expect today. And then we'll discuss more in detail some of the issues that she raises.
Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana will deliver the final budget for this parliamentary term here today. But very little has changed during that time. Near non-existent economic growth is once again set to dominate the speech here today, in which Godongwana will have to explain how he plans to pay off government's soaring debt and a public sector wage bill that swallows up almost 30% of the budget. During the midterm, he indicated that he needed to raise at least 15 billion rand through taxes, but such a move could prove very unpopular in an election year. When President Cyril Ramaphosa delivered the State of the Nation address here 2 weeks ago, he gave very little away about what government spending priorities will be, although the health sector will be watching rather keenly to see if there will be money to fund a national health insurance. Whether Godongwana's tough love approach to state-owned enterprises will hold also remains to be seen, with Eskom and Transnet already on the receiving end of handouts. But a deal to sell off South African Airways to a private equity partner is yet to take off. Lindsay Dentlinger, Eyewitness News, Parliament.
So, George, you were talking about trade-offs, and Lindsay there raises the soaring government debt and footing the public service wage bill, which is also staggering. I mean, that swallows up 30% of the budget. What do you think the trade-offs are likely to be?
Again, it's hard to predict, right? But I do think what makes this budget speech even more difficult in election year, right? And so election years, as I call them, it's like interesting, right? Because normally, because with the eye on the election, the tough decisions normally don't get made. So, and with Billing having said that, if you can't raise taxes, obviously that won't go down well with the electorate, and so I think potentially the only other option is more borrowing, right? Which is also also not great. So for me, I think if we are able to, because if you think about, I mean, for an example, every year the AG comes out with a report which doesn't make for good reading, and particularly around wasteful expenditure. And so that number keeps going up. So I think for me, that's one area where if we are there's really diligence and rigor, we can arrest that. And it can give us some breathing space, right? And so that's really what I'm looking for. What are those areas that will, if we arrest the spending, the wasteful expenditure, gives us some breathing room, so we don't have to raise taxes or even go for more borrowing.
But how do we arrest it?
It's and that's the difficult thing, right? Well, it's not difficult, but as I say, it requires the will, the diligence, and really making sure that, because the governance is there, at least on paper, right? And so it should not be difficult, but it requires human beings to actually be diligent around this thing. So for me, and that's potentially for me what's been disappointing, the fact that we've seen and it hasn't happened overnight, right? It's been building up, and so we're at a point where it's almost, in my view, almost the tipping point, and so it's almost as if we really need to get back to basics and make sure that the governance is in place, the right processes are in place, the right people are in place, but above all, the will is there to tackle some of these difficult issues.
I mean, you use the word diligence. I mean, we're not particularly diligent nation, are we?
Well, one of the things the government, I think, has done pretty well and continues to do pretty well is collect our taxes. If one looks at...
yes, if we could use that elsewhere, right, that skill, that
if we look at the
success.
effectiveness of SARS, if we look at the legislative process, it works pretty well as a tax practitioner. It's not perfect, but it's one of the aspects that I think works really well. So it can be done. I mean, obviously, it's absolutely crucial because that's where the money comes from. So, and that's referring to the income side of the equation. What George is referring to is the expenses side, trying to contain and manage wasteful expenditure. But it's absolutely imperative that we do that because we can only squeeze the tax base so hard. And beyond that, it starts becoming counterproductive.
I think it's fair to say that taxpayers have been squeezed very hard.
Absolutely.
Combine that with interest rates and what we've been witnessing the last couple of years.
Absolutely. There's no question about that. And that's not going to stop. I mean, we're seeing in my specialist field, which is transfer pricing, we're seeing SARS being very active. We're seeing cases actually going to court for the first time. So the focus on tax collections is not going to change. But we have to grow the economy and we have to manage expenditure.
Stealth tax?
So I think what you might be referring to is not adjusting fully for inflation with the brackets. That could be where the 15 billion comes from, so we'll keep an eagle eye on that. As we say, I mean, tax rates can't go up, but we know we're still in an inflationary environment, so if the tax brackets don't move, that would effectively be taxing us more highly, and that might be somewhere that the 15 billion is going to come from.
I mean, what do people say to you? I mean, we know it's an election year and, truth often goes missing in this time, but we can't afford to wait.
No, indeed, we can't afford to wait. And I think the general sentiment is, those of us who pay tax, and unfortunately the tax base reducing, and so effectively, there's not much you can squeeze out of these individuals. But I think generally, the sentiment is cost of living is high, with high unemployment, particularly around the youth, as you've spoken. And so for me, I think that's really something. If we don't pay attention to that, it's a recipe for disaster, right? And so and this is where I think the diligence comes in, right? To make sure that we are doing the right things. And as you say, I mean, SARS is almost a model of what's possible, right? And so we've shown that we can do it. And so it's how do you then, transfer those pockets of excellence everywhere. But the general mood is, cost of living is high, unemployment, and people are generally struggling, right? So, and really a paycheck away from kind of being, below the breadline here.
I mean, imagine if you get those, a certain number of those 60% youth working and paying taxes. I mean, what sort of dramatic difference that would make to the country, to them,
So
to
our
everything.
our biggest contributors to tax revenue, the three big ones are individual income tax, VAT, and corporate income tax. And I mentioned them in order of size. So corporate income tax is relatively modest compared to the other two. And by pushing up employment, you push up both of those two, because firstly, the people get taxed on what they're earning, and secondly, they spend the money in the economy. And that effectively is a tax on the ultimate consumption of goods and services. So, that's absolutely the best way is to of growing the tax base is to grow employment and obviously address multiple social issues. One of the points that keeps coming up is the cost of the social relief of distress grant.
Correct.
And I mean, as a compassionate human being, you can't begrudge someone that small amount of money that stands between them and poverty. But it's not a solution. I mean, the solution is to get those people in employment. And it's, in a sense, it's not something that should be temporary in the sense we should take it away from people, but we should make the need for it, in my view, less urgent and by creating employment.
But you make an important point there. I mean, the president was lauding the success of this and how many people are getting the 350 rand in this sort of distress relief. I mean, that's nothing to celebrate. It should rather be the exception.
Absolutely. And I mean, many commentators have made that point. It's all very well, praising the ANC, and he speaks as if it's the ANC dishing out that money. It's not. It's the taxpayer.
Yes.
And of course, we'd rather that it wasn't necessary.
Yeah, I think just on that point, I think the issue here is it should be temporary relief, right? But I think where we are going with this, it does seem like some permanent solution, right? And so the point is, it is from a humanity point of view, it is a good thing that the state looks after the vulnerable, right? But while doing that, a more permanent solution needs to be put in place, which is employment, because there is no other solution.
I was going to say, I mean, you could question that, if the state is looking after the vulnerable. I mean, the way you do that should be by creating jobs, by providing security, by sorting out the infrastructure, fixing the infrastructure.
No, absolutely. Look, and I think all over the world, you do have some kind of relief, right, for those who at any point are not employed. I mean, Germany, for instance, has that type of system, and many other countries. But I think the difference there is the focus is really getting people into employment, right? Rather than spending more and more on people who are not in employment and actually not doing enough to get people into employment. Yeah. For me, I think that's the slight difference, because I don't necessarily think that you are going to get away from this, for me, which should be temporary relief, to be honest.
And you don't want to put people in a position where they stop paying taxes, where, the the holes in the road aren't being fixed, everything that we pay taxes for, it's not working in our favour. What sort of impact is that having on the public purse at the moment, on the fiscal at the moment?
Personally, I think the tax gap is not that wide. Certainly not. I mean, I'm not sure about the informal sector, but I think with the formal sector, there are very few places to hide. You know, if you're in employment, the fact is SARS knows about you. A heavy onus is placed on your employer to withhold the tax. So, yeah, I don't think because the tax gap is the gap between what should be paid in theory in total and what's actually paid. And there are all sorts of guesses as to how wide that is. But I don't think that's as wide as all that. SARS obviously are focusing on making sure it's as small as possible. But one does, of course, have the danger with lack of delivery that you get civil disobedience. And if, in effect, e-tolls and the approach that people have taken, e-toll isn't a tax, it's a compulsory charge. But there's been really a collective civil disobedience with people just refusing to pay them. And that's in my view, quite a dangerous precedent.
Again.
Yes, so delivery and non-delivery and the issues of withholding taxes, especially at local government level as well. It's not just central government. I mean, I think the issue of non-delivery at local government level is obviously that much more tangible. And so the delivery is absolutely essential in terms of promoting a responsible, compliant tax culture.
During the President's SONA, he was looking for his pen. He wanted to sign off the NHI, get that up and running. I mean, that really appeals to the populace. You can understand why. I mean, everybody wants something like that. Obviously, healthcare that's accessible to all and of a high standard. We just don't have that money.
No, we don't. And in fact, we don't even know for sure how much money we're going to need for that, right?
Other than it being billions.
It's billions.
Yeah.
It's billions. So it's a lot of money. At this point in time, it looks unaffordable. So the question is, again, how do you fund that? I mean, do you raise taxes? That's something that's been spoken about. Where does all that money come from? And so there's still a few unanswered questions, right, around NHI, and until there's some level of detail, I think it's going to be a struggle, right? How does public sector and private sector play together? How is it funded? And so on and so forth.
Because one of the reports is that we're going to buy up a whole lot of private hospitals and turn them into government hospitals. And again,
I had that.
Where's that money? Where's that money coming from?
The funding, the operating model, what's the role of the different role players in this? Then I think we'll continue to. There'll continue to be pushback, unfortunately.
And the pushback, obviously understandable. I mean, corruption, it's everywhere. And our leaders are often very guilty of that themselves. So you can understand why people are concerned. It's going to be yet another, as they say, feeding trough, and it's going to do more harm than good than those who need it the most.
Yes, absolutely. And, so the lack of detail, obviously, I mean, it is an appealing concept. But the thought, raising taxes is not going to happen in this budget, I don't think. I mean, that the medium-term budget policy statement, the minister actually said that explicitly. I mean, to what extent are we trying to fix a delivery problem with a policy change? Because really we, in a sense, already have universal healthcare. It's just not very good. And we should, I think, whatever we do, with or without NHI, be focusing on that delivery side of the equation.
And from your point of expertise, I mean, what do you make of the SOEs and getting those up and running? I mean, there are very few that are functional at the moment, and that requires a large amount of money. We know that Eskom is probably going to get more money today as well.
That's definitely a question for George.
Yeah.
It impacts taxes and everything.
Yeah.
So something we don't talk enough about is this idea where we've normalized the idea of state-owned entities getting bailouts, right? And
we haven't normalized it.
We have.
I was going to
we
say
have in this
yes,
country, right?
Yes, it's like Here we go again.
But it shouldn't be normal.
No.
Right? It shouldn't be normal because, I mean, if you look at other countries, whether it's China or Singapore, they have state-owned entities that run very well. And in fact, they run so well that they're able to compete in other markets, right? And so, particularly around Singapore, so now the minister a while back spoke about there's a reform process for state-owned entities, right? We're still not sure what that looks like, what's in, what's out.
But I mean, even that, I mean, just how often do we have to hear about reforms?
Absolutely.
And,
Absolutely.
We've got a plan and we'll share it with you.
Yeah.
And
But the point I'm making, Jane, with this one is that we shouldn't, this idea that every year state-owned entities, come with a begging bowl for billions of rands, is
and
not
get
something, and then get it, is not something that should be normal. And so there, again, if you're looking for case studies, as I say, China, Singapore case studies where those entities work well, and so there's no reason why we cannot look to that and actually apply it here. But again, you'll hear me repeating this word around diligence, right?
Yeah.
It requires that level of commitment, diligence, rigor to make sure that governance is in place. There's consequent management. And you run it efficiently and effectively. Right? And so. Again, if the reform process doesn't include some of these things that I'm mentioning, then I'm afraid it's gonna be almost putting a plaster when you're requiring sort of surgery.
And I mean, investors and credit rating agencies look at every single factor, every single level of our economy. What sort of message does he need to give today?
Well, I think the issue with SOEs is not just the financial cost, which we've just been talking about, but it's also the knock-on effect into the wider economy, where the economy is reliant on the services produced by Transnet or in our ports or wherever. And this is also obviously very topical, the fact that one of the big issues faced by the mining companies is the logistical challenges. Eskom and the effect of load shedding is massive on the economy. So the knock-on effect of having SOEs that are not functioning optimally is not just financial for the taxpayer, it's obviously financial for everyone participating in the economy, individuals, businesses, and it's absolutely imperative that the delivery of those essential services be addressed. I mean, possibly some kind of teaming with the private sector, that could be part of the model going forward. I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly how that looks like, but it's become urgent. It's uncomfortable for us not having electricity. It's impacting the cost of the goods we buy, the food we buy. There's a massive global, we have to acknowledge that what we're facing is partly, a global picture of a cost of living crisis. It's not purely South African, but we are scoring some significant own goals, and it would be encouraging as a South African and as a taxpayer to know what plans there are to address that.
And the impact on our reputation.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of these objectives fall by the wayside. So it would be good to have some sense of, I guess, detail, but also which then provides some confidence, both locally but also abroad.
If he's not going to chop today, because there's very little area where he can, election year and all of that, which stick at the foremost of our minds, he has to borrow. What impact, so where will the money come from, and what does it mean for you and me?
Yeah, perhaps this is but my worry is we now, we go to the IMF and with all of the, the conditions that comes with those type of loans, but
obviously the more we borrow, the more we spend on servicing the debt, and I would imagine going to the IMF is the point where you can't borrow from anyone else at that point, and you get forced by them to do the stuff we really ideally should be doing here and now. I think from a tax policy point of view, something we'll be watching out for very closely for big multinationals is Pillar 2. So we know that the Pillar 2 rules are being introduced around the world, and that's the global minimum tax rate of 15%. And we haven't yet seen the when it's going to be introduced in South Africa. We know it will be, and it should be imminent because we can't really afford to be late adopters. So I think our big multinational or South African-based multinationals will be looking very closely for an indication of when we can expect the Pillar 2 rules and when we actually have to start being ready to implement it, because it's a massive compliance burden.
Well, let's hope some of the issues will be answered today, because Enoch Godongwana is just about to deliver his budget 2024.
Madam Speaker,
now be an opportunity for silent prayer or meditation. Please be seated. Order. Order. Honorable members, take your seats, please. Honorable members, take your seats. Before we proceed with today's business, I wish to announce that the vacancies which occurred in the National Assembly due to the passing of Ms. Alice Hlebani Mthembu and Ms. Violet Siwela have been filled by the nomination of Mr. Kulani Elphias Richard Hadebe and Ms. Nuran Muller, respectively, with effective from the 16th of February 2024. The members have been made and subscribed the oath in the Speaker's office. I welcome you, honorable members, to this National Assembly. Honorable members, the Secretary will now read the first order to third orders together.
Orders of the day: introduction, appropriation bill, and the tabling of the division of revenue bill. The second order: introduction, second adjustment appropriation 2023-2024 financial year bill. The third order of the day: introduction, gold and foreign exchange contingency reserve account defrayal amendment bill.
The Honorable, the Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker,
Nosiviwe Mapisa Ngagula, His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa, His Excellency Deputy President Paul Mashatile, Cabinet colleagues, members of the Executive Committee for Finance, honorable members, the Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, fellow South Africans. Madam Speaker, according to two prominent economists, Alberto Alsenia and Danny Rodrigues, they had this observation to say, and I quote, "A crude distinction between economics and politics would be that economics is concerned with expanding the pie, while politics is about distributing it." The point, Madam Speaker, is that the size and quality of the national pie is what informs and ultimately determines the realization of the political imperative of redistribution. Our mission over the past 30 years has been to restore both social and economic justice for our nation and to decisively address the inequality that was the hallmark of the system of discrimination and dispossession. The budgets we've tabled since 1994 have been about securing the goal of growing the economy so that we can do more to address the inequalities and deprivation that still scar our society and undermine the promise of democracy. So it is with a great sense of privilege and purpose that I stand before you to present the last budget of the 6th Democratic Administration. Siyabuya. Madam Speaker, I therefore table the following documents before this House. The 24 Division of Revenue Bill, the 2024 Appropriation Bill, the estimates of national expenditure, the 2024 Budget Review, the 2024 Fiscal Framework, the Second Adjustment Appropriation Bill, the Budget Speech, the Gold and Foreign Exchange Contingency Reserve Account Deferral Amendment Bill. Allow me to begin, Madam Speaker, with the global outlook. Global growth is forecast to increase from 3.1% this year to 3.2% in 2025. The moderate improvement is due to growth in the United States and several large economies. There are downside risks from potential spikes in the global oil price if the conflict in the Middle East escalates, and if growth falters in China, the country's largest trading partner. Despite improved global outlook for 2024, South Africa's near-term growth remains hamstrung by lower commodity prices and structural constraints. We estimate real GDP growth of 0.6% in 2023. This is down from 0.8% growth estimated during the medium-term budget policy statement. The revision is due to weaker than expected outcomes in the third quarter of 2023, particularly in household consumption and fixed investment. Between 2024 and 2026, growth is projected to average 1.1%. The growth outlook is supported by the expected easing of power cuts as new energy projects begin production and as lower inflation supports household consumption and credit extension. But there are also risks to the domestic outlook. These include persistent constraints in electricity supply, freight rail and ports, and higher sovereign credit risks. Our challenge, honorable members, is that the size of the pie is not growing fast enough to meet our developmental needs. As such, our fiscal strategy to support economic growth reduce risks to the economy while ensuring fiscal sustainability. Compared to a year ago, the budget deficit for 2023-24 is estimated to worsen from 4% to 4.9% of GDP. The higher budget deficit means that debt service costs in 2023-24 have been revised higher by 15.7 billion to 356 billion. Debt service costs will absorb more than 20% of revenue. To put this into perspective, spending on debt service costs is greater than the respective budgets of social protection, health, or peace and security. For this reason, honorable members, we are strengthening our strategy and sticking to our fiscal goals. A net reduction of 80.6 billion in non-interest expenditure is being implemented over the medium term. At the same time, revenue has been revised up by 45.6 billion over the medium term relative to the medium-term budget policy statement. And we have taken the decision to introduce a reform of the gold and foreign exchange contingency reserve account, also known as GFECRA. Taken together, even with the spending increases I will announce later, the national government gross borrowing requirement will decline from 457.7 billion in 2024 to 428.5 billion in 26-27. The deficit will begin to improve from 24-24 to an estimated 4.5% of GDP, reaching 3.3% by 26-27. Debt will now peak at 75.3% of GDP in 25-26. All of this puts us in a position to continue to protect core services. It allows 60% of non-interest spending to be directed to the social wage. It allows us to preserve capital spending. Compared to the medium-term budget policy statement, we are adding 57.6 billion to pay for the salaries of teachers, nurses, doctors, among many other critical services. Madam Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, in this budget, we're announcing a reform of the GFECRA. GFECRA is an account held at the Reserve Bank that captures gains and losses on the country's foreign currency reserve transactions. Simply put, if the rand strengthens against the US dollar and other reserve currencies, the account balance declines, and vice versa. The account balance has grown to over 500 billion over the years because the rand has depreciated over time. A new settlement arrangement is being introduced that will reduce government borrowing and improve the Reserve Bank's equity position. Ultimately, we are bringing South Africa closer to our peers and ensuring alignment to international best practices. We will draw down 150 billion rand of the GFECRA balance once we have ensured that the sufficient buffers are available to absorb exchange rate swings and the solvency of the Reserve Bank is not compromised. We have embarked on a broad structural reform agenda that aims to address the challenges that held back our growth. This agenda included areas like electricity, logistics, water, telecommunication, and visa reforms. The budget review details the good progress that has been made in these areas over the past few years, but obstacles remain. And let me focus on the two largest of these. Load shedding is a problem that confronts all South Africans. It disrupts production, operations, livelihoods. Reforming the sector will result in long-term energy security. We took the necessary decision in the past 5 years, and these are beginning to are bearing fruit. To promote further investment in renewables, this budget proposes an increase in the limit for renewable energy projects that can qualify for carbon offset regime from 15 megawatts to 30 megawatts. Eskom continues to be a key role player in the electricity sector, and the debt relief plan allows the entity to focus on its core business. We will release the report on the independent review of Eskom's coal-fired power stations in the coming week. The review was done to inform part of the conditions attached to the debt relief plan. The recommendations will fit into Eskom's corporate plans to bolster accountability and oversight. It is true the combination of private investment in new energy projects, rooftop solar installations, and improvements in Eskom generation fleet that load shedding will reduce, and reliability and security of supply improve. In addition, to support these efforts, we're introducing a new 2 billion conditional grant over the medium term to fund the rollout of smart prepaid meters. This will begin with the municipalities that have been approved for debt relief. To address South Africa's increasingly unreliable logistics system, Cabinet approved the Freight Logistic Roadmap in December 2023. The roadmap outlines immediate steps needed to improve port equipment, locomotive availability, and network security. It also sets out a clear path for enhancing efficiencies, facilitating the introduction of competition, and leveraging financial and technical support of the private sector. In this regard, third-party access to the freight rail network will be introduced by May 2024. In ports, private partner has been secured to upgrade Pier 2 of the Durban Container Terminal. This should increase private investment in equipment, enhance technological capability, and improve operational efficiencies. Government has provided Transnet with a 47 billion guarantee facility to support the entity's recovery plan and meet its immediate debt obligation. Like Eskom, the guarantees come with conditions. These conditions require Transnet to focus on its core activities and for the entity to introduce private sector partnerships. This will improve Transnet's sustainability and support the implementation of the roadmap. Madam Speaker, I'm proud to announce that as part of this budget, we're introducing fundamental and far-reaching reforms to infrastructure financing and delivery. The reforms are to optimize the infrastructure value chain to be effective and efficient. In this way, we will strengthen the public investment management and the associated value chain. We will also attract private sector participation. In this regard, we gazetted amendments to the PPP regulatory framework on for public comments early this week, Minister Kubai. These amendments seek to reduce procedural complexity in undertaking PPPs, creating capacity to support and manage PPPs, formulate clear rules for managing unsolicited bids, and strengthening the governance of fiscal risk. We are reviewing institutional arrangements and governance for catalytic infrastructure. The intention is to create clearer mechanisms for accountability, cooperation, and coordination. We're also consolidating similar functions to reduce duplication and inefficiencies. The intention is to fast-track delivery, particularly of blended finance arrangements. We are introducing several financing instruments, such as infrastructure bonds and concessional loans. As part of this, a flow-through tax vehicle for specific infrastructure projects, similar to trust and other investment vehicles, is being considered. A new funding window for proposal under the new dispensation of financing instruments will be open to the public institutions shortly. What does that mean? Those who know BFI, it's a new window of BFI. Through these reforms, greater efficiency gains and infrastructure delivery will be fast-tracked. This will benefit network sectors, social infrastructure, PPPs, and blended finance projects. Madam Speaker, the National Treasury plays a crucial role in mobilizing resources, designing incentives, and influencing policy to mainstream climate change. As climate-related disasters intensify and multi-layer risk-based approach is being developed to manage the associated fiscal risk. This considers various funding instruments from grants to contingency funds, including climate change response fund, depending on the incidence and intensity of the disaster event. The National Treasury is reviewing disaster response grants to improve efficiency and create incentives for disaster planning, preparedness, and risk reduction. It is also developing a climate budget tracking framework to influence policy, planning, and budget decisions by tracking climate-related expenditure in public budgets. The support of concessional funding providers such as multilateral development banks is going a long way to support our climate adaptation, mitigation, and energy transition, and sustainability initiatives. Crowding in the private sector is necessary to manage the climate disaster funds. The government has raised $3.3 billion so far from multilateral development banks and international finance institutions to support climate change, energy, and just transition objectives. We are actively participating in climate negotiations, aligning with government advocacy for reforming multilateral finance institutions. We are also working with the 8 municipalities to adapt and mitigate the effects of climate weather-related events by providing technical assistance for climate-responsive capital projects. The electric vehicle white paper outlines our strategy to transition towards a broader energy vehicle production and consumption in South Africa. Starting with electric vehicles, it aims to transition the automotive industry from primarily producing internal combustion engine vehicles to a dual platform that includes electric vehicles by 2035. To encourage the production of electric vehicles in South Africa, government will introduce an investment allowance for new investment beginning from the 1st of March 2026. This will allow producers to claim 150% of qualifying investment spending on electric and hydrogen-powered vehicles in the first year. The incentive will be implemented in addition to the existing support under the Automotive Production Development Program. Government has also reprioritized $964 million over the medium term to support transition to electric vehicles. Honorable members, the Public Procurement Bill was expeditiously passed by the National Assembly. The amended bill has now been referred to the National Council of Provinces for concurrence. National Treasury is supporting provincial legislators as they process the bill and conduct nationwide public hearings. The bill provides for transformation measures that through set aside, pre-qualification, advancement of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination, these measures will be applicable to specified categories of persons, including small enterprise owned by Black people, Black women, Black youth, Black people with disabilities, and enterprises with particular geographic area, including enforcement of transformation through the BBBE level status. The bill also makes provision for local industrialization through designation and measures for sustainable development, labor absorption, and enterprise development, among others. We're well aware that currently procurement processes often fall short of delivering the cost-effective solution to government's needs. Too often, there's a substantial disparity between the prices government is being charged and the prevailing market price. For instance, I'm told the government buys about buys ICT hardware such as laptops, uninterrupted power supply devices, monitors, and toners at between 1.5 and 1.2 or 2 times more than market price. Given that government buys in large quantities, we should in fact be paying less and leveraging our buying power to get more value for our money. Obtaining value for money as the principle of efficiency, transparency, and competition remain paramount. And we want to assure South Africans that these principles are not incompatible with transformation. Honourable members, the weak performance of our economy has resulted in sharp deterioration in tax revenue collection for 23-24. Yaqala indaba ndiza kule ndawo enzima ye-tax. At 1.73 trillion, tax revenue for 23-24 is 56.1 billion lower than estimated in the 2023 budget. The shortfall is largely due to the decline in corporate profits and revenue for taxes on mining. Over the medium term, revenue projections are 45.6 billion higher than the 2023 medium-term budget policy estimates, which increased personal income tax and additional medium-term revenue proposals. This budget contains tax measures that will raise 15 billion in 2024-25 to alleviate immediate fiscal pressures and support faster debt stabilization. Revenue is mostly raised through personal income tax, but not adjusting tax brackets, rebates, and medical tax credits for inflation. For alcohol products, excise duties above inflation increases of between 6.7 and 7.27% for 24-25 are proposed. This means a can of beer increases by 14 cents. A can of cider and alcohol fruit beverage goes by 14 cents. A bottle of wine costs an extra 28 cents. Mthembu says safe. A bottle of fortified wine will cost an extra 47 cents. A bottle of sparkling wine will cost an extra 89 cents. Wait, a bottle of spirits, including whiskey, gin and vodka increases by 5.53, 5 rand 53 cents. Salim Bangalamato. We're also proposing into no smeto BE apho basinganga. Ku whiskey nezazinto sishayo BE uba ulapho ke na ulimele mfowethu. We're also proposing increased tobacco excise duty by 4.7% for cigarettes and cigarettes tobacco, and by 82% for pipe tobacco. This translates into 9 rand 51 cents increase for cigars. Yabona ke chubana nalimala. 97 cents increase to a pack of cigarette, and an extra 57 cents for a pipe of tobacco. Hamkhelo Mkhane from Soweto, one of the over 2,700 South Africans who sent budget tips to the minister, has a suggestion I would like to share. Kamo says, I quote, I would suggest an introduction of a tax payment for hubbly bubbly as a cigarette and other alternatives. The country has seen an increase in a number of youth smoking these products, and parents are not pleased with this at all. Close quote. I would like to say to Kamo, as a parent myself, I agree with you. I'm certain the Minister of Health also agrees. You will be happy to hear that we are tabling an increase of the excise duty on electronic nicotine and non-nicotine delivery systems known as vapes to R3.04 per milliliter. On environmental taxes, the carbon tax increased from 159 to 190 rand per ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. From the 1st of January 2024, the carbon fuel levy will increase, not the fuel levy, the carbon fuel levy will increase to 11 cents per litre of petrol and 14 cents per litre for diesel, effective from the 3rd of April. A discussion paper outlining proposal for the second phase of the carbon tax will be published for public comment later in the year. Madam Speaker, we are mindful of the already high cost of living, the impact fuel prices have on the food and transport costs. In this regard, we are proposing no increases to the general fuel levy for 24-25. This will result in a tax release of around 4 billion. This is money back in the pockets of consumers. Madam Speaker, progress has been made on the two-pot retirement system since I last addressed you during the medium-term budget policy system. Contribution to retirement funds will be split, with 1/3 going into a savings component, 2/3 going into a retirement component. Now, abantu bandistopa bonke esitratweni bandibuza uba iphuma nini imali yethu. Nibaxelele ke ngomalungu eParliament xa nigoduka ukuba from i-1st kaSeptemba bonke bazayifumana le mali. From i-1st kaSeptemba laa mali yepension iyafumaneka. Nam funeka bayeke undiphazamisa endleleni. Ndinomnye udadewethu phaa oyitishala unozicela usafuna ngokuba ndiyazi noyazi uba imali yena azayifumana ndizayazela phi ngoba kaloku uyawuyazi ngepension yakhe. So from the 1st of September 2015, silwile noJoe ngale. We must commend on Honorable Maswangai. He has been vociferous in making sure that this bill passes. And we even fought on the timelines. It was difficult to persuade him because the industry was not ready. He wanted to be effective from the 1st of April. But the industry was not ready, but he allowed us to postpone it to the 1st of September. Thank you, Comrade Maswangai. So, the two-pot system ensures that we strike a balance between preserving contributions to safeguard a better retirement for members while addressing the plight of the people to access some of their retirement funds to help ease their financial burden in times of distress. Over the next few years, we're also implementing a global minimum corporate tax to limit the negative effects of tax competition. Multinational corporations with an annual revenue exceeding 750 million euros will be subject to an effective tax rate of at least 15%, regardless of where their profits are generated. This is a global tax. That's why even the benchmark is euros. It's an agreement in the OECD. So we're beginning to implement that. So irrespective of where your profits are generated, the proposed reform is expected to yield an additional 8 billion in corporate tax revenue in 26-27. I encourage interested parties to provide comments on the draft global minimum tax bill published today. Our long-term tax policy strategies remain focused on broadening the tax base while improving tax compliance and administrative efficiency. Visible progress has been made in rebuilding and modernizing SARS. The tax authority has expanded the tax register, improved debt collections, and reduced fraudulent refunds and trade valuation. This has led to improvements in revenue collection. To address the higher levels of illicit tobacco, SARS is deploying CCTV and related technologies at licensed tobacco manufacturers. Investigations and prosecutions have resulted in 10 billion in additional assessment, of which over 4 billion has been collected from the key players in the illicit gold and tobacco industry. These and other efforts have assisted with the improvement in revenue. Our bigger challenge, as I've stated earlier, is that our pie is not growing fast enough, and this limits our ability to generate sufficient revenues to distribute among our priority areas. Madam Speaker, at the time of the 2023 medium-term budget policy statement, when revenue collection had performed much worse than anticipated, departments had to reprioritize spending and absorb the wage increases within their baseline. These measures were taken to protect our fiscal integrity. Equally, critical programs had to be protected. This is a practical expression of fiscal consolidation that supports delivery of core services and the social wage. Since then, we have been able to reverse some of the fiscal consolidation announced at the time of the medium-term budget policy statement. In this budget, I'm able to announce that the education sector is allocated an additional 25.7 billion for the carry-through cost of the wage increase over the medium term. At the same time, we are able to protect the budget of critical programs such as school nutrition programs, the program that provides food to pupils in almost 20,000 schools. The Early Childhood Development Grant is allocated a 1.6 billion, raising to 2 billion over the medium term. Health is allocated a total of 854 billion over the medium term. These allocations include 11.6 billion to address the 2023 wage agreement, 27 billion for infrastructure, 1.4 billion for the NHI grant over the same period. The allocation for the NHI is a demonstration of the government's commitment to this policy. There remain a range of system strengthening activities that are key enablers of an improved public healthcare system that must be undertaken. Such activities include building a national health information system and digital patients' records, upgrading health facilities and improving the quality of care to ensure that they meet the minimum criteria to be certified as accredited for contracting under NHI. Strengthening facilities and district management in preparation for contracting. Granting semi-autonomous status for central and potential other hospitals, and developing reference prices and provider payment methods for hospitals. Many of these activities are already underway, but require further development before the NHA can be rolled out at scale. Madam Speaker, there's also been significant progress in improving access to public transport services for low-income communities. The Rail Recovery Program of the Passenger Rail Agents of South Africa is continuing with 27 corridors reopened by December 2023. This will increase the number of passengers on Metro Rail from 15.6 million in 2022-23 to an estimated 48.6 million by 26-27. To ensure the effective discharge of office duties during elections and its other responsibility beyond the polls, the Independent Electoral Commission is allocated 2.3 billion. The police and the defense, purely for the elections, are allocated an additional 350 million to support the elections. A further 200 million will be allocated for political party funding as political parties prepare for the general elections. Government also supports resettled farmers through land redistribution and tenure reform programs, which have been allocated 6 billion over the medium term. To keep pace with inflation and increase access, permanent social grants are increased. Let me just pause and say bendihamba ngabe eGoodwood lethu ndithukwa ngomama exhakwazana elinye linikhomba nge-walking stick. Uthe wena kakuhlukane nosinyusela nge-20 rand. So I want to assure la gogo ukuthi mna ndi-generous anizomnyusela nge-20 rand. We are giving them an increase of 100 rand to the old age grant. Water veteran, disability care and grants. This will be split in 90 rand effective from April and 10 effective from October. 50 rand increase for the foster care and 20 rand increase to the child support grant.
Order.
We are sensitive to the
Order.
increase in the cost of living for nearly 19 million South Africans who are really rely on these grants to make ends meet. In this regard, we have done as much as the fiscal envelope allows. Work is currently underway to improve the COVID-19 social relief of distress grant. By April the 1st, like all other grants, these grants are starting on the 1st of April. As the President has said, that is going to be improved. Work is being done. The Minister of Social Development is publishing regulations. When we finally gazette those regulations, the new grant and the figure will be published together with those regulations. These improvements will be within the fiscal framework. For the extension of the grant beyond 2025, we have made the point that it may have to find some revenue source for it. PAC. We have also made provision for key initiatives aimed at job creation. 61.4 billion is allocated for employment program over the medium term. 7.4 billion has been identified for the Presidential Employment Initiative. Government is also prioritizing fighting crime and corruption with a focus on enhancing law enforcement agency. Mamela, I was in that going on. If facts is on the table, we're doing the work. We're doing the work. As known, deliver. A total of 765 billion rand is allocated to peace and security cluster. In the coming financial year, 10,000 new police recruits will be trained. And as part of the country's responsibility to promote regional peace and stability, this budget will also allocate funding for the deployment of soldiers in Mozambique and DRC. Work on costing and identifying these needs for these critical missions will continue throughout the year, and funding will be allocated as such. 628 million has been allocated to the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development for the implementation of FATF and State Capture Commission recommendations, bringing the total funding to these efforts to 2.3 billion. Government is using 2.9 billion from the Criminal Asset Recovery account to combat illegal mining and other priority crimes, with a 60% allocated, in fact 1.7 billion allocated for the deployment of the police, including vehicle procurement. This budget is also prioritizing infrastructure provision. Government plans to invest more than 943 billion rand in public infrastructures. Spending will support refurbishment and maintenance of existing assets and the building of new infrastructure. Madam Speaker, 2.8 trillion, or put it differently, 5.1% of total non-interest expenditure is allocated to provinces and municipalities over the next 3 years. 531.7 billion is allocated to local government and 2.2 trillion for provinces. An additional 105 billion rand is allocated to provinces for the next 3 years to cover the cost of implementing the 2023 Public Service Wage Agreement, mainly in education and health sector. Provision of these additional funds will cushion the wage bill pressure faced by these critical personnel-intensive departments, while freeing up resources for capital investment in goods and services. Moreover, reductions that were previously made on some of the grants have been reversed. Restoring baseline of these grants will help maintain important service for the most vulnerable and provide for critical capital investment. However, to ensure public finances remain sustainable, the reductions are maintained to several other grants baseline, although many continue to grow over the next 3 years, despite the reductions. Regarding municipalities, an additional 1.4 billion is provided for municipal disaster recovery grant to fund the repair and reconstruction of infrastructure damage by the tragic floods of 2023. Madam Speaker, municipalities are the coalface of service delivery. Sadly, an unacceptable number of them are experiencing weaknesses in governance, financial management, and service delivery. To address these challenges and to transform municipalities into engines of growth, we have adopted a multi-pronged approach. It focuses on tightening budget processes, ramping up oversight, increasing the skills and capacity of municipal employees, and driving investment in maintaining and building infrastructure. Madam Speaker, this year the country hosts the annual meetings of the new development bank, which will happen for the second time since formation of the BRICS Bank. In 2025, South Africa takes on the presidency of the G20, following that of Brazil and India. Before that, South Africa's G20 president is an opportunity for us to advance the most pressing economic and developmental and financial issues that face poor and developing countries. As President Ramaphosa rightly stated in his State of the Nation address, our goal is to place Africa's development at the top of the agenda when we host the G20 in 25. We are working on the necessary allocations and identification of funds to make sure that the various events are a success. As we have shown recently, South Africa remains an important regional and international leader. Through participation and advocacy on platforms such as G20, we can push for substantive reform of multinational institutions like the World Bank and IMF, so that developing countries participate more equally in the decision-making process and global governance. Moral courage and know-how are not in short supply in our country. We should harness these gifts not only to better ourselves and our economy, but for the benefit of the entire continent. Madam Speaker, we've come a long way in the last 30 years. 30 years ahead of us, and whatever the challenges and opportunities they may bring are something we should look forward to. Given our difficult past and some of the inevitable challenges we have faced as a young democracy trying to find its place in a world marked by a number of new and overlapping crises, it would be easy to indulge in extremes, either of blind optimism or crippling pessimism. We should resist both these extremes. Rather, we should heed the words of our first democratic President Nelson Mandela, who more than saw the pursuit of socio-economic justice and shared prosperity as a journey rather than a destination. Allow me to repeat what the President said in his closing remarks. I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I've made missteps along the way, but I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, the only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I've taken a moment to rest and to steal a view of the glorious vista that surrounds me. To look back to the distance I have come, but I can only rest for a moment, for with freedom come responsibility. I dare not linger, for my long walk is not ended. In the land. Madam Speaker, as I conclude, I want to remind South Africans that the message today should take away from this budget. Government is making the most out of its way with limited resources. We continue to support economic growth, reduce growth of government debt and the cost of debt, allocate more funds for core services, and provide the social wage. I'm grateful to the President and Deputy President for their continued support and leadership. Lo support yenu bifuneka nya. Thank you to the Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. Masondo, and the excellent National Treasury team led by Director General Dr. Duncan Peterson, the majority of whom, Mr. President, are Tinswalos. Thank you to the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services and the Governor of the South African Revenue Bank. Thank you to my colleagues, the ministers in the committee of the Mincom Board and in the Budget Council who shared the heavy load of the tough decision that meant to sustain the Department of Finances. To Parliamentary Command, my chairperson, Honorable Maswanganye, Honorable Telezi, of course, and to my wife and family, your love, support, and forbearance are daily inspiration. Lastly, thank you to you, each and every one of South Africans, and those who have been sending messages encouraging. I thank
the Honorable the Minister of Finance.
Well, if you smoke and drink, then I'm very sorry for you. We've been listening to the Finance Minister delivering his budget for 2024. Sin tax is going up quite substantially. Here's an example. Vodka will go up by R5.53. The tax brackets, though, will not change. It's called fiscal drag, I believe, so that's pretty good for you and for me. 765 billion will be spent on security, and they'll probably need that after increasing that sin tax. He was saying that the size of the pie is not growing and obstacles remain to our growth recovery, which we know about. For example, electricity being one of them. It was quite interesting that he mentioned 1.4 billion to NHI, and I was just talking about it with my guests here. It seems that that's quite a mature way of going into this. So you're going to start from the bottom up, and while they do their research rather than imposing this beast on us. Spending on debt, quite staggering, 356 billion. That's 20% of our revenue, and that's money that is spent on more than anything else in, for example, education and health. He spoke about the two-pot retirement system. It seems a positive development. I'm also going to speak to my guests more about that. The transition towards new energy vehicle production, which should be good for our industry here in South Africa. He said social grants have increased in line with inflation, and 61 billion for an employment program. So obviously taking into account staggeringly high unemployment, including that 60% of the youth. And sort of money, he mentioned money that we have access to, the 50 billion in foreign reserves, and the sort of other big figures that he threw around, 37 billion for Transnet, 943 that'll go towards public infrastructure. My guest, Billy Joubert, tax expert at Deloitte, and George Tsane, a government healthcare industry leader, also from Deloitte. Billy, what did you make of that?
So I think we called where the extra money is coming from, which is the fiscal drag. And just to explain what that really means, it means not adjusting the tax brackets for inflation. So assuming that one is fortunate enough to get an inflation-related increase, which obviously wouldn't indicate a promotion or anything like that, it just means paying you effectively the same to compensate for inflation. You will effectively, all of us will be paying more because the tax brackets over the last several years have been adjusted according to inflation. So it's, I mean, I think you referred to it before the speech as tax by stealth. He's not doing it stealthily, he's doing it very openly. But
So not so very nice for us then.
no, it definitely means that we're effective, not nominally paying more, but effectively we're paying more. So, and then the other thing we were watching for is the global minimum tax, and he's indicated that's coming in the 26-27 year. That's still some way off. I'm actually quite surprised. I think we would be relatively late adopters. It's not going to bring in a huge amount of revenue. He said in that year it will bring in about an extra 8 billion, so it's a useful contribution. But as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a massive compliance burden for multinationals. So I think many South African-based multinationals will be breathing quite a sigh of relief that they've got a bit of breathing space to be bringing that in.
And what's that for you?
So I think the 1.4 billion for NHI indicates that there's still quite a bit of work that needs to be done before implementation. So groundwork, as it were, and the allocation for smart meters for municipalities, because I mean,
was that 2 billion, wasn't it?
I think it's about 2 billion. Yes. Municipal debt to Eskom is a significant number, and so hopefully that enables them to improve on their revenue enhancement programs. And then I think the spend on public infrastructure, I think that's great, and then the guarantee for Transnet, for the recovery of Transnet, I think is good news.
To get industry moving again.
Absolutely.
Lindsay Dendlinger is standing outside the City Hall in Cape Town to get response. Let's cross over to her. All right, we don't have her yet, but as soon as we do, we will get back to her. It'll be interesting to see what those sitting there listening to him had to say about it, and if the opposition parties are satisfied by what he came up with. I mean, you're talking about staggering numbers and sin tax being one of them. I mean, that's always an obvious one to go to. What do you make of that? I mean, is that
well?
Is that
Just
good
the
enough?
other thing I actually meant to say, it's quite significant from a tax point of view, is this incentive for the production of electric and hydrogen-powered vehicles. And I think it's very important to note that the APDP, the incentive program we have, has been a massive contributor to the investment by global car companies in South Africa. And we know who they are. There are many of them. And they're big employers. And we know that the car industry has to move with the times, and there is this shift towards green energy. So it's 150% of qualifying investment in facilities to build those vehicles, and it's encouraging our own domestic car industry to stay current and up to date. And I think
that's a relief all round, isn't it? Because
definitely.
our car industry has been under the cosh, and they've been extremely worried about developments and
Absolutely.
being left behind.
Absolutely. So that's, I think, something very encouraging from a tax point of view.
He spoke a bit about Eskom, obviously saying load shedding is a problem. What are his expectations now from Eskom, and how does he make it functional? I mean, he was quite positive about our energy situation and resolving that.
Yeah, so one of the things he said in the last budget speech was the fact that they're taking the government is taking on some of Eskom's debt in return for, and he said there are conditions around that, so that we don't get back to almost the same place. So it would be interesting, I mean, he didn't mention that, but it would be interesting to understand how that's going and whether or not those conditions are met. So not much detail around that. So he was quite bullish about the.
But surprising, not much detail, right?
Surprising, not much detail, but
But I think worth noting, sorry to interrupt you, but he mentioned the fact that there's been this review of the coal-fired power stations, and I think the results of that are going to come out in April. And then there seems, just from what I saw, to be a clear move towards relying on solar. We know about the tax incentive that was available for the current year, and now there's the smart rebate tax program that we've already mentioned. So I think, the shift towards solar and renewables is also intended to relieve the pressure on Eskom.
as long as that shift is allowed to happen, because that's been held back, hasn't it?
Well, I think changing consumer behavior, and I think we certainly have seen that happen. You know, most of us these days probably have solar panels on our roof. And so I think
It's
is
a must.
real.
Yes, and accessible. I mean, you can get it same way that you get your phone, right, these days. You were saying how the rand has strengthened to 83. So what do you think that suggests?
Well, I just noticed shortly before the speech, the rand had weakened to over 19 rand. It was 1906 the last time I looked. I just checked now quickly. It's gone back below 19, so that looks some sort of massive shift, but it seems to indicate a relatively positive initial response.
And the debt, staggering.
Here, the debt. Hopefully the money that is being taken out of the foreign reserve account is used to service some of that debt service cost. Because that's a massive number. I mean, I don't recall what that number is, but it's
356 billion, 20% of revenue.
Absolutely right. So that's a massive number. So, and if that's the case, then it's good news. Yeah.
Tell us more about this foreign reserve, this account that we have access to. What's that all about?
Yeah, I think Billy probably knows more than
I know nothing. I've never heard of it till today. But
till today,
based on what I read, it's a fund held at the Reserve Bank to cover gold and foreign exchange, and obviously it's considered to be it's the accumulated value is 500 billion, and it seems that 150 of that amount is available to be released, and that will improve the equity position of the Reserve Bank and the government's debt level. So that seems to be a kind of a windfall that will be, used to reduce our very bad overall financial position.
All right, let's go to Lindsay now. She is ready. She can hear us. Lindsay, over to you.
With me, Good Party's Brett Heron, to chat about this last budget of this parliamentary term. Good afternoon, Brett. Thank you for joining us.
poverty line or the lower bound poverty line. So I think that there were missed opportunities for the Minister of Finance to make choices around priorities, and it seems as if the Minister of Finance and the government is stuck around the structure of the budget, unable to move beyond the structure to identify the priorities that will lift people out of poverty and address unemployment, but rather just to extend each budget line item by a couple of percentage points and so satisfy line departments without satisfying South Africans.
And maybe a little... to be hit quite hard. How do you see them responding to that increase?
Well, we've long felt that
personal income tax has carried the burden of tax in South Africa, and there is room for an adjustment to corporate income tax. So I think that was a positive step to say we're going to engage with corporates, please participate once we publish this bill. And so I think there is room for corporate income tax to be restructured and for the base, as the Minister said, of taxpayers to be expanded. So we need extra tax revenue. It's not going to come from personal income tax, but we do need to look at corporate income tax. And how it compares internationally, South Africa has a relatively low corporate income tax rate.
Just last,
read the Reserve Bank Act, it provides for the reserves and the dividends that accrue to government to be paid into the state revenue fund. And when you're sitting with 500 billion rand cash reserve in that fund, and we have a deficit, and we're struggling to address crises that are affecting our economy and our people, then I think it's the right move to dip into that fund and to use the Reserve Bank Act, which allows for that to happen in order to give us some relief.
Thank you very much for your time. We're hearing of the Good Party talking to us there about some of the things the Finance Minister has spoken about in his speech. And with us we have the DA's Dr. Dion George, who presented an alternative budget to us earlier this week. Thank you, Dr. George. I can just ask you to stand this way. Obviously, the Minister is not quite meeting what you have presented in your alternative budget. I know you're not a fan of dipping into our reserves. So how do you receive that news that we will be dipping into those reserves to pay off those student debts?
As we expected, it's basically an ANC bailout budget. Because what the Minister is doing is he's taking 150 billion rand at least, and we're not entirely sure it's going to actually end up being, and taking that money out of the contingency reserve, which you need for a reason, in case there's something that you're not managing in terms of risk in our economy, which is quite small. And he's throwing it into a massive big pit of debt. It's going to make no difference whatsoever. We're already paying 1 billion rand per day on interest on debt already. That is not going to sort out a problem. We've got structural problems, and the two structural problems are, firstly, is our economy is going to go, which means that we're not going to get the growth, we're not going to get the sustainable jobs we need, and we're not going to get the revenues obviously. And then, of course, the second problem is the spending. The Minister has not touched the public sector wage. And that, obviously, is an enormous amount of pressure on us. And also, although there's no direct bailouts to the state-owned enterprises, we still have the transfer of that debt, and we've got transfer of debt from trustees as well onto the national balance sheet. So there's no way that he's going to be able to make any difference whatsoever by throwing this contingency reserve into this problem. So also, he did absolutely nothing for vulnerable South Africans battling in the cost of living crisis. There are millions of people for vulnerable South Africans today. We've put a stealth tax actually by not adjusting the tax brackets for inflation. Everybody's actually getting more money with inflation, but they're paying more tax, you see, so they're not getting actually the benefit. So that is the problem. Also, what he could have done is he could have cut the tax on fuel. He could have supported vulnerable South Africans by expanding the zero VAT rate on food, but he did nothing. So this was certainly not a budget for the people. The vulnerable people got left behind, battling South African households got left behind, but he focused on keeping his constituency happy, and of course, now dipping into our reserve. And we're going to see him digging further and further, because it's in a hole that he actually cannot get out. Well, I think it's positive is that.
And apologies for that technical glitch. So, in a nutshell, I mean, her guest was saying that this should be more poor friendly. Obviously, they're concerned about the debt, as are we. Billy, how do we walk away from this?
Well, just with the tax hat on, I sincerely hope this fiscal drag we've already discussed is a temporary measure because, you know, a massive share of the overall tax burden falls on our relatively small pool of people who pay individual income tax. It's where the biggest chunk comes from. That's all of us who are fortunate enough to have jobs. And obviously, we're all facing a cost of living crisis. And so I'm sincerely hoping that this is a once-off and that normal service will be resumed next year and that we'll get the adjustments that we should be getting simply to compensate for the effects of inflation.
George, I mean, do you think that, I mean, you highlighted a few positive points. Is this an election-winning budget speech?
Well, yeah, there's that, right? But I think for me, one of the things that are missing, I mean, the state-owned entities is a big part of our lives, right? And so particularly around the reform, and what does that look like? What's the cost of that? And so it would have been great. But in the absence of that, it does look like these issues are with us for a while yet.
Quite amazing that he skimmed over that. Such an important issue. Do the credit rating agencies enjoy this?
Well, it's interesting that the rand is appreciated, right? So, so there's some positivity there. But so overall, I guess I spoke to the trade-off in the beginning. So he had to do some fancy footwork there. More importantly, I think the 150 billion for the foreign reserve, I think, from a debt service cost, I think hopefully that's what it is. That's positive. And no increase in tax, but the fiscal drag is that. So I guess overall kind of mixed, but could have been worse, I suppose.
I think that's where we are in this country. It could have been worse, so that's a good thing, isn't it? Billy Joubert, George Tsesane, thank you very much, both of you. Really appreciate you coming in. And thank you very much for watching. That's a wrap from us at EWN.